Welcome to this home Brewtique instructional video. My name is Claire and today I am going to walk you through brewing a beer in your kitchen using a home Brewtique small batch kit. We're going to film today in real time, so I'm going to start the stopwatch and we'll see at the end how long the whole brew day has actually taken us. In the interest of time saving, I'm going to get straight onto some early points and then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about the purpose of the video. So the first thing to do when you're going to brew in your kitchen is turn on the oven. I have an Aga, so I don't need to do that, but what you need to do is set your oven to the temperature in your recipe book, around about 65 to 70 degrees. So do that now so the oven can start heating up. If you don't have an oven, we're going to address that later on. If you don't have an oven, you can't turn one on now. So the next thing to do is to start heating up your water. For this part, you will need a cooktop of some description. I'm just using an electronic induction little plate here. You will need a big stock pot. We recommend at least 9 litres. This is the one that we sell and it holds 10 litres. It also has internal volume markings, which is really handy. So we need to measure our water out straight away. A tip is to just turn on the heat as soon as you start, so that it will start heating up the water really quickly. We're using bottled water, and I'm cooking or brewing Hopalicious today, which is our multi-hop IPA. And for that I need 8.2 litres of water for my brew. So I'm going to add the water in and just use the markings on the pot to get to my 8 litres. And then the last 200 mils, I'm just going to use my measuring jug. So in the interest of speeding things up a bit, I'm going to use 2 bottles. So can you hear me over the pouring? Okay, I'll talk loud. We use bottled water because it helps just ensure consistency for the brew. Tap water is perfectly fine to use. I'm splashing myself everywhere. You can use tap water, but depending on where you live in the UK or in the world, even if you're brewing somewhere else, the water will contain various levels of minerals, and that will differ from place to place. Sometimes that is good for brewing and sometimes it's not so good, depending on the recipe type that you're making. So in order to cut that variable out, definitely for the first few brews that you do anyway, I would recommend just using bottled water. Funnily enough, it was cheaper to buy in 2-litre bottles than in a big 5-litre bottle. Okay, that's my 8 litres. So the recipe calls for 8.2. So I'm just going to top it up with my 200 mils. There we go. And add that in now. So put the lid on while it's heating up, and hopefully it'll heat up really quickly. And I'll just get rid of these. Okay, so today I'm going to brew Hopalicious, which I said before. While that's heating up, I'm just going to come back and talk a little bit about the purpose of the video today. So we do work really hard to make our instructions clear and concise, giving you enough information but not too much. But sometimes it's really hard to explain a technique in words. It's much easier to put it in pictures and to just see it and you can understand what we're talking about. So we decided to make this brew along video so that you can use it alongside your instructions, and hopefully it should answer any questions that you have and ensure that your brew day goes smoothly. I am just going to apologize in advance because this is the first time I've done this, so I might digress and waffle a little bit, and because I'm really trying to film this in real time, I may well forget something and come back to it, but please forgive me. And much like brewing, the more I do this, the better I'm going to get at instructing on it. So behind the camera we have Dan. He's going to come say hello.
Hello.
And Dan is he's going to We didn't do that in rehearsal. Dan is going to hopefully point out anything that I've forgotten to mention, or if something that I've said is unclear or I've not explained it, hopefully Dan is going to flag it with me so I can remember to tell you. Okay, so the idea with this, because we're filming it in real time, is that you can have it on your kitchen bench as you're brewing and use it as a reference point, because I should be traveling at the same rate as you are when we're brewing. Something that I do want to mention, at the beginning I started a stopwatch, and that's so that we can see really how long the brew is taking. Definitely I would recommend doing that for your first brew, so that you start to get an understanding of how long it takes you in your kitchen with your equipment, how long your brew day takes, which will obviously help for future planning. You'll know if you have time to squeeze in a brew or not. And the other reason to do that is for your note taking. So in the back of our instruction booklet, we have brewer's notes, which gives you some guides on things that we think that you should take note of. I can't stress enough the importance of taking notes when you're brewing. It's something that will help you get to know your equipment better, which will then obviously improve your brewing and your final product. You'll get better at temperature monitoring, you'll get to know your equipment, and the notes will help you with that. The other thing to do is that brew days don't always go smoothly. Sometimes you might be caught doing something and you'll leave it in the mash for longer, or you'll miss out an addition in your boil. All sorts of things can happen. Just note them down, because it may or may not have an impact on the final result of the beer. And when you brew lots of different beers, you'll forget what happened in which brew. But also it is a month between when you brew and when you taste the beer, so chances are you will have forgotten all the little details that might have happened. So do write it down. I can't stress it enough. It's a really good reference to come back to. If you create an amazing beer by doing something different, you want to know what you did so you can do it again. And on the other side of it, if you do not create an amazing beer, you really want to know what you might have done and avoid doing that again in future. So quick note on that. Okay, so moving forward, the equipment that we're going to need for this part of the brew, obviously apart from your pot and your hot plate, will be found in your recipe pack here and your equipment set. So I'm just going to move these to the side and I'll pull out one that I've opened already. So the part that you'll need for this, the first thing I would mention is your hops and your yeast. If you followed our instructions, which I'm sure you all did, you have been keeping your hops and yeast in the fridge or the freezer just to ensure their freshness. Pull these out now if you have done it. That's because we're going to need the hops in the next stage, but the main reason is that we want the yeast to warm up to room temperature. And I'll explain more about that later on. So you don't need to use this yet, just make sure it's not in the freezer. Pull it out and just leave it on the bench so it can warm up. The other part you'll see in your recipe is the sugar finings and the sanitizer in a little bag like this. We don't need this yet either, so move it to the side, but just make sure that you know you have it. What we do need for now is our thermometer. So we supply a spirit thermometer. If you have another one that you'd like to use, by all means, you can use that. I'm just going to take the temperature now and we'll see whereabouts we are. When you do a temperature test, it seems obvious, but do try and keep the lid on to maintain as much heat in the pot as you can. So we are now coming up to nearly 40 degrees. So we have a little while to go yet, but what we're looking for in this recipe is to hit 69 degrees, and we call that our strike temperature. This is generally 2, maybe 3 degrees hotter than the temperature that you want to get for your mash, and that's because when you add the grains it will decrease the temperature a little bit. So we're just aiming slightly higher than that so that when we add the grains it'll bring it down to our ideal temperature. So the other things that we need for this part, from our equipment and our recipe pack is your brewing bag, which will come very nicely wrapped like this. But I've got one that I've unwrapped already. So it's just a black voile bag, and it's designed to fit in our pot, but it will obviously fit in different size pots as well. We also have our grains, which have been measured out specifically for this recipe. Depending on the recipe that you're using, the grain mix will be different. But what will be the same is that we will mill it fresh for you. So if you received your grains yesterday, then chances are they were milled the day before. So we do mill everything fresh to order, and we vacuum pack it to help keep in the freshness. In reality, I know sometimes during transport the bags get beaten around a bit, and it can mean that sometimes the sharper parts of the grains might poke through the bag a little bit and destroy the vacuum. If that does happen, don't worry, your grains are still perfectly safe to use. They will still make fantastic beer. They don't really even need to be vacuum packed. We do that just to ensure freshness for absolutely as long as possible, so that you don't feel under any pressure to start brewing straight away. If the seal is broken and you are going to brew in the next day or two, or even the next week, I wouldn't worry about it, wouldn't do anything. But if you're not sure when you're going to brew and the vacuum is broken in your bag, what I would recommend is that you put the grains in a airtight container, or maybe a Ziploc bag if you have one big enough, and store it in the fridge if you can. Otherwise, just somewhere cold and dark, and then they should be fine for a good 6-8 months until you're ready to brew. Okay, so we also will need a spoon here for when you add your grains in. So now's another good time to take the temperature and just see where we are. So again, remember to keep the lid covering the water as much as possible. And it's very exciting viewing, I'm sure. Okay, so we're still short. We're almost at 50 degrees now. So we've got about 20 degrees to go. I can't remember, there was something else I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember what it was. So the brilliant thing about our brew in the bag method, which was developed in Australia, as I understand, is that it acts as a filter for the grains. So it means then we can just use one pot to brew in, and it makes brewing super easy. It makes it quicker. It means there's less hassle of different pots. You need less room overall. And it also means that we can mill our grains much finer, because the bag will act as a filter and catch any little bits of grain or any particles. When you pull the bag out with the grains, you're just left with nice clear wort to carry on to the next phase of the boil. So I think this is going to take a couple more minutes just to finish heating up, and rather than me just filling that with babble, we're going to pause the video now, and we're going to come back to it as soon as we've reached strike temperature. So just feel free to pause the video, wait till your water heats up to the temperature that is in your booklet, and then resume, and we'll carry on from the next stage. Okay, so welcome back. We are just reaching our strike temperature now, so you should be at yours as well. Depending on your recipe, it will be 69 to 71 degrees. At this point now, we need to add our brewing bag. So take off the lid, and you want to insert the brewing bag, loop the handles over your pot handles to hold it in place, and then stretch the elastic over the top of the pot, like that. Put the lid back on while you're waiting, just so that you don't lose any heat. And now we want to add our grains. So you will need some scissors, which I did not mention before, but I'm sure you have scissors handy. Cut open your bag. With some good sharp scissors. Okay, and you'll need your spoon as well. Okay, so we're going to pour the grains in and just mix as you pour them in. The idea of mixing is that we don't get any clusters of grains that kind of stick together and create something called a dough ball in brewing terminology. And you don't want dough balls because that effectively reduces really the amount of grain that is being exposed to the water, and it therefore reduces the amount of sugar that you'll be able to get out of your grains. So mix it all in until make sure there's no lumps. And what we need to do now is put your lid back on and just take the temperature again. And this is where you want to note it down in your brewer's notes, what the temperature was before you added the grains and after you added the grains. So check your recipe and it will tell you what specific temperature you are aiming to hit. In this case, we are looking for 67 degrees. If you find that the temperature is a little low once you've added the grains, which at the minute we are at 65, so we're just slowly rising still. But if you do find that the temperature is slightly too low, then just keep it on the heat and add a tiny bit more heat, which is what I'm going to do now, just to bump it up a temperature, a degree or two, until you hit the temperature that you're looking for. I'm at 66 now, but what I'm looking for is 67. So just keep the thermometer in because it won't take long and you don't want to overshoot. If you're unsure, then less is more. So once you turn off the heat, probably it will keep rising. So just bear that in mind. But again, this is another really good reason to write things down on your brewer's notes. So I'm just going to stir that around and we're nearly there. If you overshoot your strike temperature and you've gone to do something and you come back and actually then you discover that you've overshot, just remove some of the water but measure it, maybe 500 mils, and add in the same amount of water of cold water to reduce the temperature slightly, and then you should hopefully hit the right temperature or be slightly lower, and then you could just heat it up gradually. So now we're at temperature. The next point is to add it into the oven for our mash. Now my oven is slightly too low for my pot with the lid on, but we do need to keep the lid on in order to keep all the heat in and to stop the water evaporating out of the pot. So very simply what I do is I just turn the lid over and sit it in, and now it will fit. So another thing you can do if you have the same issue is put foil on top of your pot, or you could maybe just stick a baking tray on top, just something to help keep the heat in. So I'm going to add this into my oven now. And I'm going to set the timer now for 1 hour, if I can get into my phone. The phone is perfect for keeping timings because you generally always have it with you. So set it for 1 hour and start it. And clean up what you've done here, but essentially stop the video now. Go do whatever it is that you would normally do when you're not brewing. Watch TV, do some work, anything you like. Come back when the alarm goes off at the end of your mash, and then we'll carry on together. Hello again. It occurred to me that I had mentioned I would talk about what to do if you didn't have an oven, and then I finished the mash start process and forgot to mention my suggestions. So if you don't have an oven, it doesn't mean that you can't brew. Your easiest option is just to carry on using your cooktop and keep the pot on the cooktop keep monitoring it maybe every 10 minutes and just add heat as you need to. Make sure you stir the mash when you are taking the temperature, just to make sure the heat is evenly distributed, and try not to overshoot. So just try and add little bits of heat frequently rather than big bits of heat infrequently. The idea being that we want to keep the temperature as consistent as possible. So rather than letting it drop and heating it up, we want to just try and have minimal drops in temperature. The other option is if you have something like an Aga, like I do, it has this hot plate on the top. So sometimes in the warmer weather, when the air temperature is quite warm, I might just sit the pot on top here, wrap it in a towel to help keep the heat in, and just leave it, and that seems to work quite well. The other option, if you have an oven but you can't adjust the temperature as finitely as you might like to, my recommendation would be twofold. One of them is get an oven temperature, an oven thermometer that you can actually sit in the oven. It will tell you the temperature inside the oven. If you're unable to, some electronic ovens are pretty good these days, and they can tell you to sort of 1 degree what your oven temperature is. So there's that option. Otherwise, if your oven can't be set that low, maybe 100 degrees is the lowest your oven will go, my recommendation would be to heat the oven up to 100 degrees and then just turn it off and add your grains into the oven when you turn it off, and the temperature will decrease, but it will at least stay warmer than the outside temperature and stop the temperature loss. What you want to be careful in that situation is adding it in maybe at 100 degrees, because then you will heat up the wort a little bit. So in that instance, I would recommend again having an oven thermometer. So heat the oven up, turn it off, check the oven thermometer inside your oven, and when it gets to the temperature that you're trying to hit, then put your mash in then, and then that should be better than just leaving it out on the bench with a towel around it, and it saves the hassle of having to monitor it the whole hour. It doesn't at least mean that your hour is free from constant monitoring. Anyway, hopefully that helps you with one of those suggestions. And now I am going to carry on with something else, and we will resume the brew as soon as my hour is up, and we'll take the pot out of the oven. Welcome back. You should now have your alarm going off to tell you that it's time to take the grains out of the oven. So that's what we're going to do. Although it is only 60 or 70 degrees, doesn't sound like much, but it is quite warm, so do make sure you wear some oven mitts when you're taking it out. Put it up on the cooktop, but before you add any heat, we need to take the temperature. Now, if like me, you've had to use your lid upside down, just take a blunt knife, butter knife, wedge it under to lift up the lid. Oh, put your thermometer in the right way. And take the temperature. Try and not let any heat out, because we do want to know what the temperature is at the end of the mash, and that is a measurement that you want to write down. So ideally, the temperature hasn't really dropped or changed from when you put it in there. But if it has, then that's good knowledge for next time. You know, either to heat the oven a little hotter, maybe make it cooler, try a different technique if the oven setting that you have isn't going to work. Now this has come out just below, fraction below 67, which is exactly what we're looking for. So we'll take the thermometer out, and I'm going to flip the lid over, because what we need to do now, so what you will notice is you get a bit of gunge on the top if you do it upside down, which is probably not ideal, but it's what I need to do to fit it in my oven. So add some heat now. I'm just going to clean off the top there. So what we're doing now is we're entering into the mash out. And the purpose of the mash out is to heat the liquid up to 76 degrees and at that hotter temperature it makes the sugar more dissolvable. So we're trying to just get every last bit of sugar out of the grains that we can and kind of rinse them off before we pull the grains out. So what you will find is that the temperature does change quite quickly, so we do want to monitor it quite closely at this point. We don't want to go over 76 degrees with the grains still in the wort, or what happens is the husks from the grains will start to impart tannins into the wort, into the beer, and tannins are not a desirable flavor in a beer. If you're not sure what they are, you will find them quite commonly in red wine, but I guess to describe it is maybe sucking on a tea bag. It's kind of a puckering, nasty flavor that you wouldn't want to have present in your beer. So that's why we monitor it really closely and make sure that we don't leave the grains in. So while we are keeping an eye on that, the equipment that you'll need for this part of the process is your bowl and a colander. This one is just from IKEA, but actually it's perfect for our brewing because it has two handles to hold onto it. It sits quite nicely in this bowl, which I think is also from IKEA, and it just is really easy to use. So we're just going to keep an eye on this at the minute. Try and keep it covered so that you can heat it up as quickly as possible. Feel free to ramp the heat right up to try and get it moving quicker. It all saves time. We don't need to stand here for 40 minutes to heat it up if we don't need to. But make sure you are mixing it a little bit just to make sure the heat is consistent so that you're getting an accurate temperature of the mash as you go. I think there was something else I was going to say now, but I don't remember what it was. I think that was everything. So this should only take a few minutes, but for now I think we're going to pause the video just so you don't get to watch me standing here twiddling my thumbs for 5 minutes while we heat up, and we'll come straight back to you as soon as we're at 76 degrees. Okay, so we are just 75.5 degrees, just half a degree to go. Do make sure you monitor it, as I said before, because you don't want to overshoot at this stage of the brew. Probably better to pull it out too early than to pull it out too late. Okay, so at 76 degrees, don't turn the heat off. Just pull the grains straight out. So lift them up. Be careful not to spill the wort out over the side of the pot. Keep the heat right up underneath because we're going to carry on with our boil, so that most of the liquid drain off. And when you're ready, just stick it in a colander and grab your bowl, and when it's mostly stopped dripping, in a minute, then scoop the bowl in and just leave that to the side now. And what will happen is that it will continue to drain off into your bowl, and you can just periodically keep adding that back into the boil. So now we are left with our wort. It is now called wort because it's basically the sugary water from the grains. So a quick note for other recipes: if you have a first wort hop addition, now is the time to add that in. So in our recipe for Hopalicious that we're doing today, we don't have that addition. But what you need to do is open your hop pouch. So just rip the yeast off and keep it separate. You want to open up your hops. You will need scissors for this. I think it does have a rip tag on it, but to be honest, it's quite hard to rip open sometimes. So pull out your hops. You will notice that all of your hops are in this one sachet. So anything that's numbered is the point that we want, is the bags that we want to use now. If you have a large bag like this with no number on it, no, that one does have a number on it. You will have a large bag in some of the recipes that don't have any number on it, and that will be your dry hop. So just open up all the tea bags from the vacuum seal. There we go. And lay them out. And if you have a first wort addition, it will be your bag 1. Just tear it open and pour the pellets straight in, and then carry on with us now. If you need to pause, just do that now and then resume back with us. So this recipe does not have a first wort addition, so we're going to just carry on heating the wort until we reach something called the hot break. So we're going to pause the video in just a second and move the camera so that then you can see the hot break in action. But if you are someone who is interested in taking gravity readings and you know a little bit more about your brewing and you're interested in the technical side of it, this is the point that you want to take your pre-boil gravity. So if it is something that interests you, we don't include the details in our instructions at the moment, but moving forward it is something I'm going to add in. So at this point, take a gravity reading, and you can always contact me and I can let you know what the estimated gravity reading should be based on the calculations of the recipe. So before we move any further, you can see we've collected quite a lot of liquid. So just pour it back in and keep it draining. If you do have a large amount of liquid there, probably add it in before you take your gravity reading, because it will just help with accurate figures. But we have around about 7.5 litres in the boil now, and that's about right when you take into account the liquid that's soaked into the grains. So we're going to just take a short break in the video to move the camera now, and we'll come back and you can have a view of what's happening in the pan. Now we're a few minutes on and we've just come back to show you what's happening in the pot. Almost too late, but you can see that the hot break is what we're looking for, and actually that's just it right now. You can see that there was a layer of foam on top of the wort, and what happens is that the foam builds up and the liquid starts to boil underneath, and at the point that it breaks through the surface of the foam, like we just saw there in the middle, that's what we call the hot break, and that is the time from which we start our timer. Even if you have had a first wort hop addition, you don't start recording the time until the hot break. So we'll turn it down just a fraction so we don't have an boil over even. So we'll turn it down a little bit, but what we're looking for now is to add in our first hop bag, or your second one if you've had a hop addition already. So what we're going to do is keep it boiling, and you're going to take your bag marked number 1, tear it open, and you'll see that you have hop pellets inside depending on what your recipe is. Just chip them straight in. Don't add the bag into the wort, just the hops themselves, and start your timer now depending on your recipe. Now for my recipe I need to start the timer for 40 minutes, so I'm going to set the timer for 40 minutes from now, and then that will let me know when my next addition is to go in. So just keep an eye on it and make sure you decrease the heat a little bit. You're looking for a reasonably rapid rolling boil, but you really don't want the am I steaming up the camera? You don't want to have a boil over, and you don't want to reduce it so much that it's really barely boiling at all. What we're looking for here is quite a vigorous boil. I mean, that's probably slightly vigorous, but really pretty good. What we don't want to do is not boil it enough and not reduce the volume enough, which then means that you'll end up with too much beer at the end that is not concentrated enough. So essentially you'll end up with more beer but sort of less alcohol and maybe slightly less flavor in your beer. So that's not what we're looking for. So make sure that you adjust your heat accordingly. So what did I say? 40 minutes. Okay, I'm setting that now. 40 minutes. So we'll leave that now to just carry on with the boil. What we are doing at the 60-minute mark, well, I'll just talk a little bit about why we boil and why we add the hops when we do. So essentially we're boiling for two reasons. One is to sanitize the beer. I guess we want to boil off and kill any bugs or any nasty things that might cause an infection in the beer and make it taste bad. And the second part is we need to boil it if we're going to add hops to it, because the hops need to go through an element of boiling in order to impart certain characteristics to the beer. So we use the hops to add bitterness, flavor and aroma to the beer. So the hops we've just added at the start of the boil and at the hop break, those ones will impart bitterness to the beer. And bitterness is important as a balance to the malty sweetness. If you have a beer without any bitterness in it, then the balance can really be off. But the same goes if you have a beer with too much bitterness, the balance can be out as well. So it is quite an art to balancing the level of bitterness in the beer, and generally it is in ratio to the sweetness of the beer. So they should balance each other out. The more malty sweetness in the beer, the more bitterness you want. And so the more malty sweetness, the more alcohol you'll get. So the higher the alcohol, the higher the bitterness. And am I giving too much information now? So that's the first part of the boil. In order to obtain bitterness, they need to boil for around about 60 minutes for the chemical reaction to take place. So the second element that I mentioned was the flavor. So anything that's added as a flavor addition will be in the last 20 minutes or so of the boil. So it's not enough to really add bitterness to the beer. It might impart a small amount, but mostly what we're looking for from an addition that is at the 20-minute onwards mark will be to give flavor to the beer. So later additions will give flavor, and the very end of the boil, if you're adding hops right at the end when you're turning off the heat, those hops will impart aroma. You have to add them right at the end because the essential oils that give the aroma are so volatile. If you boil it at all, they'll just boil off really quickly and you won't have anything left. So that's why you'll see you have hops added for different reasons. And as a result, you tend to have different varieties of hops that are good for different things. So I probably won't go into it any more than that, other than to say that hops are added to beer historically because they also have an antiseptic quality about them. So they do help, in addition to the boil that we're doing now, the addition of the hops will help the beer from spoiling as well. So that is why hops became common addition to beer. So while this is carrying on with the boil, there's really nothing else for us to do with the beer at this point. But what we need to do now is consider later in the brew. So we need to get our equipment ready, and we also need to boil the kettle. So if this is your first brew, particularly with not being certain of how vigorously to boil, my recommendation would always be more vigorous than less, because if you boil it too vigorously, we can always add more liquid at the end to dilute it down. But what you can't do is boil it longer to concentrate it more, because then you upset the balance of the hops. So my recommendation would be, if you're not sure, just hoik up the heat a little bit, and if anything, just boil it down too much, and you can always add water at the end. So we're going to keep it at about that level. That's pretty good. That's a rolling boil, reasonably vigorous rolling boil. That beeping is my dishwasher that is just finished, if you can hear that. But we're going to pause the filming just for a second so we can readjust. But in the meantime, put some water in the kettle. I would say no more than 500 mils, but use the bottled water and boil the kettle now so that it can start to cool down. And if we do need to use it, you have a good hour and a half or so for the water to cool down. So do that now, just as a backup in case you overboil and you need to touch up the volume right at the end. So we'll pause the video now and we'll come back looking at the equipment that we need to put together. Okay, so while we're carrying on with the boil, we need to get the rest of our equipment ready. So at this point you will need your fermenter with the lid, you will need your airlock, and you will need your dispensing tap with the back nut and the extra washer. In your equipment set you'll also have a bottling wand. We don't need that at this point, so just keep it to the side. You don't need that for another couple of weeks until you're actually bottling. So we'll put that aside. For this stage you will also need your little bits and bobs bag, which includes your finings at the back and 2 sachets of sanitizer. There is also sugar in there, but you don't need that until bottling day. So just make sure you have it handy. So we're going to go ahead and put the fermenter together and set up the sanitizer. Now we do recommend that you wash everything in warm soapy water before you use it. So let's assume that you've done that now. But you'll have instructions here. These are a bit crinkled, but you can just follow through these to tell you how to put the fermenter together. The main points being that you need a washer on either side of the bucket, and to make sure that the hole in the dispensing tap, this one, is at the top, not at the bottom. So we're going to put that together now. And the easiest way, you should have a washer on the tap already. Put it into your pail. And then, can you see that? Is that okay? So put your other washer onto the thread and push it up to the bucket as much as possible, and then we're going to thread the back of it on. Can you see this? Do you want to zoom in a bit? Just tell me if that. Nope. Yeah, okay. So just screw it on as much as possible on the inside, and then what I tend to do is stop there when the little notch is at the top, because you know that's in relation to where the hole is. So then I'll hold that and I'll screw the tap side of it in to tighten it. You do want to get it as tight as you really can, just prevent any leaks. So that looks pretty good. What we're going to do now is test it for leaks. So make sure that you close the tap off and just tilt it up so that it's not knocking in the way of the bench. So flick it to closed, and then just fill it with water. You only need the water to cover all of the hole, essentially. So we will pop that up. Okay, so then a good way is just really to put it on the bench. Make sure the bench is dry underneath and just let it sit. Come back to it, leave it for a few minutes just to make sure if there is a slow leak that you can catch it. So I think we say 10 minutes in the instructions. You probably don't need that long, but it's really to guide you on not just doing a quick check and thinking it's okay and then setting everything up. It's really to make sure you leave it for a little while and see if there's a drip. We have had instances where people have not checked it properly and then have noticed once they've added their wort and yeast and started fermenting that it's dripping, and it's really too late to try and tighten it then. You can, but it's really difficult. So the idea of really testing it for leaks now is that if it is leaking, all you really need to do is tighten the thread a little bit, tighten the back nut, and when there's nothing in it, you can just stick your hand in and tighten it up and retest it. So test it until you are happy that it's not leaking. So I'm pretty sure this one is not going to leak, but for the purpose of the video, we're going to assume that it's not leaking. So it's still dry under there, which is the main issue. You can feel around the tap as well. We did have a couple of taps that were actually leaking out the front of the tap. They were faulty, and that is obviously not what should happen, but that was only one or two. I think they all seem to be okay now. We have different batches now, so just bear in mind if it does leak out the front, that's clearly not meant to happen, and it means that the tap is faulty. So if you've not tested this before your brew day and you'll discover any kind of fault like that, please contact us straight away. Carry on with your brew, and we can give you suggestions on how to tighten the leak. But let's assume that that's not going to happen. And for now, I'm going to say that that's not leaking. So what we'll do now is we'll just tip out the water. I probably didn't really need to do that because now I'm just going to fill it up with water anyway. So we need to make up our sanitizer now. So what you will need here is your airlock, your lid. You will need 1 sachet of your sanitizer. So open your bits and bobs bag. Don't lose the finings because you'll need these. So maybe put these with your hops because this is going to be added into the boil. But for now, you have 2 sachets. One is for bottling day, so we'll put that up there with the bottling stuff, and the other one is for today. So just shake the powder down, tear it open, and pour it into your fermenter. And then we're going to add 5 litres of water. So you can add cold. If you add it in at the start, it should start to dissolve when you add the water in. So you can just mix it. You can use a spoon, I just use my hands. If you want to make the water slightly warmer, it does help the sanitizer to dissolve rather than it being sort of ice cold water. But we want to mix it all up, and the key is that when it hits the edge of the, it's the base of the handle, that's 5 litres. So you can just see through the bucket when you reach the 5 litres. Just turn the tap off, keep mixing it, make sure that all the granules are dissolved. As I said, if you want to make this happen a little bit faster, just use warmer water and mix it until you don't feel any grains at the bottom. And once that's all dissolved, then you're ready to go. So this product is a no rinse sanitizer, which means it won't harm your beer if you don't rinse off the product at the end. It does only need 2 to 3 minutes contact time. So at the minute we're going to have plenty of time to sanitize everything. We still have a good half hour left in the boil, so we have plenty of time to make sure everything is sanitized. So we're going to add in now the airlock. Just pull it apart, drop it in, both parts of it, make sure it's fully submerged, and the lid as well. So just kind of shove it in there like that. And you can pretty much forget about that for now, because that's going to sanitize, and leave it for 3 minutes at least, and then just pull it out and drain it. You can leave it in there for longer, it won't do any harm. The main thing is not to forget to do it. So if we do it now, it's done and we can forget about it until we need the fermenter later on. So that's all you need to do for now. We're going to pause the video again and come back when we are adding in our finings. So depending on your own recipe, just carry on with the instructions, setting the timer as it says, adding the hop bag that's relevant to that time. Make sure you tear the bag open and pour the pellets into the wort. And in your own recipe, at the point that it's adding your finings, come back to the video and we'll carry on. We'll add the finings and carry on until flame out and into the chill. So see you on the flip side. Okay, so we've come back now and you should be ready to add your finings. So in our recipe, that is where we have I don't know, a couple of additions left to go. Just take your little fining sachet, cut it open, and just pour it in to your brew. And this step is completely optional. The finings are used to help clarify the beer. What they do basically is kind of clump the proteins together and help them drop out of the beer now, and it means that your beer should clarify a little quicker when it's in the bottle. You don't have to use this. It is vegetarian, it's vegan, it's just a seaweed extract. It doesn't impart any flavor to the beer itself. So if you forget to add it in, don't worry, don't add it later. You need to add it during the boil. But if you do forget to add it in, please don't worry. All it means maybe is that your beer might take a little bit longer to clarify, or it might be a little cloudy when you drink it. So it might not look as pretty, but it should still taste great. So that's a little note on finings. So while we wait for the rest of our additions, on this recipe we still have 3 bags to go, but we have added all the liquid drain off from our brewing bags. So now what we're going to do is actually wash the brewing bag because we need it later on. So just empty out the grains. Oops. If you are going to save the grains and use them for cooking, you need to dry them out in your oven. So for the minute, I'm just going to tip them into the bowl and try not to make a mess. Ooh. And then I'm going to come and just hand wash this now in the sink. So I'm lucky enough to have a waste disposal, so I can get any last bits of grains, rinse them off and wash them down the sink. Obviously, if you don't have one of those, you maybe don't want to clog your sink up with grains, clog your drain. So just be aware of that. Maybe rinse it in a bowl first of water. So what we're trying to do now is just clean the bag so that we can sanitize it, and then we're going to use it right at the end when we're ready to ferment the beer. So wash all the last little bits of grains off the bag, and then just use dishwashing detergent. Just put a little bit on. Just want to wash it out. And this is how you wash your brew bag at the end as well. It's really quick. Don't put it in the washing machine. It really doesn't need it. And you just want to use quite a gentle detergent. So I've had my brew bag that is brewed over 20 beers for me with the same bag. So really your brew bag should last you quite a long time, particularly if you're careful with it and don't poke knives in it when you're using it. Okay, so that's clean now, and just squeeze it out. And what we're going to do now is just drop it into our sanitizer because we need to sanitize it. I also forgot to mention before you might as well sanitize your thermometer now because we're going to need that later when we're chilling the beer. So I'm going to run an ice bath now, but I need to just clear this away. So fill your sink with cold water, ready for the final phase, which is the chill. So just stick a plug in and fill it up. So while that's filling up, we still have a couple of minutes to go for our last couple of additions. No we don't, we have another addition right now. So I'm going to add my next bag. Okay, we're going to pause the video now and I'm going to come back when it's time to turn out the heat. So see you just in a minute. Okay, so my alarm has just gone off and that's to add my final hop addition. So just with all your other ones, tear it open, pour in your pellets and turn off the heat. We want to stop boiling now. These last hops that you've added are the ones that are for aroma. So what we don't want to do is boil off all the essential oils. Now, if you have a dry hop, like we do with Hopalicious, you'll have one hop bag left. It won't have a number on it. So this one is to dry hop and add to your beer later on when it's fermenting. So just stick it back in the foil pouch, fold it over and stick it in the freezer. That will help keep it fresh. If you have one of those little bag sealy clips, IKEA does them, then just clip that on just to help keep any extra air out. But keep it in the freezer and remember to put a note in your phone, in your calendar, about the right day to dry hop, or trust me, you will forget. I have forgotten lots of times. So what we want to do now is take our beer over and put it in the ice bath. So come with me. This is the water that we filled the sink with before. Really carefully drop it in. You do not want to splash water into it. And I've got here just some little bricks to go in a, what do you call them here? Cool box?
Yeah. In
a cool box. I would call it an esky, but stick these in. These can work really well. I probably put too much water in the sink, but that's okay. Just again, be careful. We really don't want to contaminate the beer now. So anything that happens from now on, anything that touches the beer needs to be sanitized. So we really want to try and cool it down as quickly as possible. This is the point when your beer is most vulnerable to infection. So make sure everything is sanitized, make sure everything's clean, and really try and do this process as quickly as possible. So what I find is cold water and some of these bricks, and swap it over after maybe 10 minutes just to help cool it quicker again. So what you can do, we're aiming to get the temperature down to 21 degrees. So take your thermometer, which has been sitting in the sanitizer, and you can stick the thermometer in, stir it around a little bit. It doesn't matter if you agitate up the sediment that's at the bottom. Stir it around to try and make sure that it is cooling. And so already I can see that it's dropped to about 80 degrees, and it was boiling before, so it was up near 100. So as long as you're keeping an eye on this, and if you change over your ice packs, it should cool down relatively quickly. So the key is, I think, just keep the thermometer in the sanitizer when you're not using it, so that you know that it's always going to be sanitized when you're coming back to it. So a little tip, if you don't have any of these little bricks to freeze, what I do sometimes is I take a 2-liter drink bottle, when it's empty of course, and just fill it with water, but I kind of squish it down so it doesn't take up so much room in my freezer. And these can work really well as ice blocks as well. So don't feel like you have to run out and buy fancy bricks or anything. Just, I mean, even if you're using the empty water bottles from previous brews, just stick them in the freezer a couple of days before you're going to need them, and they will be frozen, and that means you're not taking up all the room in your freezer when you don't need to. So that's just a handy tip. So now we're just going to let this chill. We're aiming to hit 21 degrees is the magic number, and just keep an eye on it regularly. It probably will take half an hour or so of chilling, but again, this is something to mark down on your brewer's notes. Just take note of the starting time and take note of the time when it hits 21 degrees, and that will help you in future brews with your calculations. So I'm going to pause the video here. We're going to come back when we're at 21 degrees and we can carry on with the final stages of the brew. So as I mentioned before, maybe after 10 minutes, if you have some more, then just replace your ice bricks. Even if you just replace the water. So take the pot out, fill the sink with cold water again, and place it back in. Then that will help to speed up the chilling process. So we'll see you when you're at 21 degrees. Okay, the wort has now reached 21 degrees. So we're just going to transfer it into our sanitized fermenter and add the yeast. So I've actually not bothered to drain it yet. So what I'm going to do is take a clean tea towel and squeeze out my brewing bag. Just take the items out that have been soaking. You should have your airlock in there as well, somewhere. There we go, the airlock. Okay, just drain them on a clean tea towel. And what you want to do is just drain out some of the some of the sanitizer even, through your tap, just to make sure that the tap is clean all the way through. Now I would tip out, I'm going to drain most of my sanitizer because I don't need it, but what you can do is wash your fruits and vegetables in it, and it does tend to make them last a little longer in the fridge. So we'll just tip all that out, drain it slightly. I'm going to finish squeezing out the brewing bag. Be careful when you're working around the beer that you don't drop anything in it. Squeeze as much as you can and make sure that the tap is closed, and line your fermenter with your brew bag. Okay, just move this out of the way. So really the last part now is to transfer the beer from your pot into your fermenter. Again, make sure it's closed and just pour it in. Just pour all of it in. And then make sure your hands are clean. I'm just going to dip them in the sanitizer for a second. Pull the brew bag out. And what we want to do then is just squeeze all the beer out through the brew bag. Be careful not to spill it out over the top of the fermenter. But just squeeze it all into the fermenter. And what will happen is that you'll leave all the hop debris behind inside the bag. Another reason that brewing the bag is so awesome. So just squeeze it gently, but enough to get all the liquid out. So what we're aiming for is our volume to be at about the top of the LCD thermometer. If you are much below that, then you can use your kettle water that we boiled earlier to top it up. So actually I have a little much here, but that's okay. So you can see there's actually quite a lot of hop remnants in there, which looks really pretty now. So you can see that we're actually just over the top of the LCD. So we don't need to top it up with any extra water. What we need to do now is just add our yeast. So your sachet that you pulled out of the freezer earlier should have reached room temperature. We're just going to tear it open and sprinkle it on top as evenly as you can, all over the top of the beer. Beautiful. Now take your lid and seal it up. And what you want to do now is put your fermenter somewhere where it can sit undisturbed for 2 weeks. I like to keep mine just in the corner over here. And can you see that from there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is move it over here next to it. make sure you've put it in place before you add your airlock. So the airlock now, scoop a little bit of your sanitizer in, not too much, just enough to fill the base of the airlock. Pop it in your grommet in the hole without the lid on, and then just add the lid to let it rest on top. And that's it, we're done for brew day now. All you need to do is clean up your equipment and we're good. So I'll see you back here in 11 days to do dry hopping, and yeah, enjoy. Well done.